Welcome back to Cube coverage. This week we've got Fergus drafting the regular cube, which is a bit of a guest cube created by Anthony Maddox of Lucky Paper Radio podcast. I've had quite a bit of fun with this cube last time we ran it. It's a very well tested, quite balanced, and the games tend to move at a pretty good pace thanks to the emphasis on small creature combat. So Fergus is looking at some nice blue cards here. I like Curiosity, pulled to the front. There's a lot of... The cube does lean very cheap, so there's a ton of cheap removal, cheap creatures. And cards like Curiosity that are normally quite a risky move to go for. The cube is kind of angled in a way where you have to take these risks. So you are rewarded for building more synergistic decks than usual, exposing yourself to interaction. And Curiosity is quite a powerful card. Used to see standard play in Constructed, pairs well with almost any evasive creature. And doesn't look like there's a great pairing for it in this pack. There's quite a few cards here for a red-black sacrifice kind of strategy. And Ash Barrens is one of the duplicated cards in the cube. Ash Barrens and Prismatic Vista appear in the cube multiple times to provide fixing that doesn't bias towards any particular color, which makes it easier to play in two-color decks, which I like. So he's looking at the counterspell, the fixing land, and the heretic. Picks up the counterspell here. Cycling is a... We've seen a lot of counterspell with cycling variants. It is very strong to have modality on a counterspell, as the value of counterspells can vary wildly. But cycling can be a bit of a rough alternative mode, as the times when counterspells are bad are usually when you're short on mana. Oh, Sheldock Isle is really strong. This is a very low-cost way to get a bunch of card and mana advantage just for being involved in a longer game. It's not too difficult to draw the game out to the point where someone's library dips below 20 cards, and then for the low cost of an early tap land, you get a powerful spell later on for free. Otherwise, Mana War and Quick Study. Mana War fitting well into this kind of Curiosity, aggressive blue type strategy. Oh, and picking up Honored Hydra, so one of the tips I've heard about this cube is because it skews very cheap, you can actually prioritize expensive cards much higher than you normally do. So a card like Honored Hydra would normally be quite low in the pick order, as it's interchangeable with any number of other 6-mana cards. But in this cube, there aren't so many 6-mana cards floating around for you to replace it with. On we see Keen Sense, the green Curiosity, would add a bit of redundancy. And there's another Curiosity variant in the pack. And Exclude, a very powerful counterspell. Back in the day, it was a defining aspect of its standard format. Just very potent against anyone paying 4 or more mana for a creature. So he picks it up here. And we often think of blue decks of not being constrained on card advantage, just being constrained on mana. But the efficiency of Curiosity is so crazy. You can pair it with cards like Unsummon to get a huge mana advantage back when you have all of these cards to spare. And just not having to spend mana on the card draw. It's a risky strategy. So he'll have to be wary about having the creature removed, but the source of extra cards has been the backbone of a lot of aggressive blue decks in constructed formats. And I think it's worth taking the risk. So we see a Fading Hope in the pack. Exactly the kind of thing that can convert those extra cards into onboard advantage. But he's weighing it up. Fungal Infection is a very efficient removal spell, especially against these small creatures. It is very easy to convert it into killing a 2/2 on defense, but anytime you snipe a 1 toughness creature with it, you get a nice 2-for-1. But he's sticking with blue. There's a surprise Bolas' Citadel in there. Kasmina, a surprisingly good Planeswalker. And Perilous Mer, a very good defensive creature, or you can combine it with synergies to convert it into a more proactive play. And Vault Scourge also something that can be a nice pickup in blue. He wants the cheap evasive creatures, the lifelink is relevant, and he's got reason to believe he's going to be giving it at least a small power boost, which is when you start to really pop off with it. Doesn't look like he's interested in much else from the pack. So no impetus to pick a second color just yet. And he is going with the Vault Scourge. So entirely mono blue so far. He's got a lot of instant speed stuff as well. But that's something that he'll have to make it into the late game in order to utilize. And Censor is another surprisingly powerful counterspell. There's Very Conclave, a pretty decent land. And I think Malefic Scythe is something that is actually quite a potent build around. I'm not sure if he's in the right deck for it, but it's easy to underestimate. Once you get a second counter on it, it becomes a real nuisance and you can grind out an attrition game. And looks like there's a bunch of white and green coming around. So with the Partisan in that pack, there is a bit of a heroic theme in this cube. It looks a little bit strange, but it's a combination of heroic and a bit of protection, because it triggers off either player's instants and sorceries. Oh, and Shardless Agent, that might be a push to commit to some green in his deck. That is a sick card to be adding. But still sticking with the mono blue. Takes the Wingcrafter. It does synergize with the Curiosity he's got so far. he'll benefit a lot from finding a creature that it's worth giving evasion to make the most of it. Especially as I think currently he's down to just 2 creatures in his deck. And we see another Simic card and a bounce land. Lots of green coming around. It might be time to commit. And there we have it. A Broken Wings picked up. First green card. Otherwise, looking at the Eutropia here, the trigger on it is not as crazy as some of these enchantment payoffs can be. And if he dips into enchantments, he might be running a bit too short on creatures in general. We see Audacity and Brontodon, both pretty good cards here. No blue left in the pack, but he's pretty locked into blue at this point. So he's got a ton of ways to enhance his creatures, a bunch of interaction. He's going to want to look for some way to get an undercosted creature. Something with big stats, because currently he can grant keywords, but he can't grant extra power. And Vidalcan Heretic, that's a pretty good card to give evasion to. The 2-mana 1/1 leaning pretty heavily on needing some kind of help in order to connect. And there's Haunted Hydra and Sheldock Isle. Sheldock Isle, I'm surprised to be seeing this late in the pack. Now, the games in regular Cube are relatively short, so getting the Sheldock Isle online is not as free as it is in some other environments. Emergent Sequencer, weirdly worded card from Strixhaven, and he picks up the Honored Hydra there. Goes for the Pilgrim's Eye, so currently no big creatures he's too concerned about giving flying to. Earl of Squirrel can be a good pairing with it, but Earl of Squirrel is so expensive that it can be a real quest just to attack with it at all. So, while granting an evasion is nice, it is not something that's going to be relevant too often. And more removal, so Fergus is really short on creatures. The Honored Hydra is a really nice pickup. That's something good to give flying to, resilient against removal. If he can pick up a way to discard it, that'll be a nice combo. But otherwise, he's going to be playing quite a creature-light Bogle style strategy. Really needs to get one of his 1 or 2 mana creatures down, put some kind of aura on it, and then ride that creature to victory. Oh, Clarion Spirit would be a nice card to have in such a creature-light deck. Combines well with blue cantrips and things like that. Skinrender is also, I think, one of the strongest cards in the cube. And there's a Battle-Wise Hoplite, which is a little bit of a payoff for going into a blue-white heroic type of strategy that he seems to be moving towards. Pestamite in this cube does not have a Splinter Twin combo to go with. It's just on rate as a flyer with a little bit of disruptive ability. And Hedge Maze is pretty hard to turn down an on-color dual land. So he picks up the Pestamite here. Looks like Wingcrafter is unlikely to make the final cut, as many of his creatures already have flying. Oh, Saddled Rhymestag is a really powerful creature. It maybe not in Fergus's deck because he's quite creature light, but it can be quite easy to turn Saddled Rhymestag into a 4/4 on your turn every turn, which is a hell of a deal for 2 mana. But he's got another counterspell and another flyer. Ravenous Squirrel, unlikely to line up with what his deck's got going on, and quite far out of his colors. So he picks up the Syncopate here. Still very loaded up on counter spells and cards that primarily play a kind of slow offensive role with the small flyers. But there are a lot of decks that you can get under with that type of strategy. If your opponent is leaning on 3 or more mana cards, Exclude is really busted. I think a lot of games it'll just come down to what kind of start Fergus can assemble. And we see here a green cantrip. Fubblethip is an alright creature. And Pelt Collector, very hard to trigger in his deck. Not many cards with more than 1 power. And looks like it's between Rain and Fubblethip. Rain is a pretty powerful card in Abstract, but he's pretty loaded on card draw and other kind of slow cards. So I'd be a bit concerned about loading up on too many cards that either require a creature in play or cost too much mana. But any kind of proactive instant can play well with all of his counterspells. And you can't build a deck to cover every situation. So it is completely valid as well to just say, hopefully my opponent doesn't play anything good in the first 2 turns, and then I can just leave up counterspells and card draw and work it all out from there. And he does go for the Rain of Revelation. And Thopter Mechanic is a pretty nice card, as is Thirst for Knowledge. And Yeva and Sylvan Advocate, also good picks for his deck. He's got some real options here. Yeva would be another bulky creature, but it is a pretty expensive threat. He doesn't have other green creatures for it to give flash to. Whereas Thopter Mechanic, I think it's easy to get locked in on the extra card draw aspect of the card, but there's also a lot to be said for a 2 mana 2/1 that makes a 1/1 on death with flying is actually a pretty good rate in blue. People have played cards like that in white, and white is not nearly as hungry for that kind of effect. And here's another counterspell with Remand and a Courser of Kruphix. Remand is one of those never particularly bad cards where even if your opponent's not playing anything worth countering, you can just use it to waste their time. And nothing too impressive here. Fight spells, probably not going to be very good in his deck. Giant Growth, not great. A lot of his creatures already have evasion, and he's in a bit of danger of not having a creature to use it on. And Radical Idea, not a card I've been impressed by. I think it implies that you're getting some card filtering and flexibility, but the rate on it compared to something like Think Twice is just not impressive to me. And he does pick up Radical Idea. Not much in that pack for him. We saw a late Joyra coming around. Joyra is a card I've been pretty impressed by in this cube. You can definitely have games where you just untap with Joyra and chain together 2 or 3 artifacts, and your opponent kind of has to respect the possibility of it, so you don't have to go all in building around it. And we see Consider, a very powerful blue card. Boonsetter is another flash threat, and one that does play pretty well with flyers if he's looking to go more offensive. And a 4-2 plays pretty good defense against medium-sized vanilla creatures. And we see Saproling Migration and this card draw artifact. Mnemonic Sphere is the kind of thing that I would say does Radical Idea's job, but better. And there's quite a few synergies you can have with the fact that it is an artifact. There's easy ways to recur permanents. I believe there's a containment construct, which is the original combo for it in Neon Dynasty Draft. And also looking at Sparring Construct. Sparring Construct is a pretty good deal for a small creature if you'd like to be able to trade it off in combat, which is actually something that Fergus might be able to do, as he's going to be stranding his opponents with nothing but early creatures. Versus Saproling Migration is a very hard to answer creature. It mainly plays defense, but it also plays defense pretty well against the kind of cheap creatures that he needs to. And Peerless Recycling, one of those cards that works well with Mnemonic Sphere. Otherwise, Embodiment of Insight, definitely not a card I've played with before, but looks like a pretty good endgame in this cube. Just a 4/4 Vigilance that can get in for a bit of extra damage is quite a relevant threat, blocks well. And Peerless Recycling looks like a decent card, but his deck is already a little bit slow to get off the ground. If he overloads on cards like this, he might not have much to do in the early game. We see an on-color dual land makes it back around. That's a big boon for him. So he does have a decent number of 1-mana creatures. So, especially on the play, he can just go 1-drop into counterspells, disruptive cards, and auras, and ride the 1-mana creature pretty far into the game. And Discovery is a decent cantrip. Also looking at this black-green land here. He's not necessarily locked into green, so if there's something in another color that would pair well with his deck, he's got the option of speculating on it. And that's what the land pickup is going to do. And Abundant Harvest makes it back around, and as does Fibblethip. Both of them kind of filler cards, work in any deck, improve the deck in subtle ways. And I actually like the cantrip creature here. Nothing for him on color in this pack. And I think nothing that he'd be particularly interested in splashing into his strategy. And here, another piece of the heroic support in the cube. He hasn't picked up anything particularly that triggers it. The fight spells do, but I think it's unlikely the fight spells are going to make it into his final deck. And that's pack 2, so he's shored up his creature count a little bit. I think he'd still love to have some kind of cheap creature that's good to protect with counter spells. The Pestamite going to be working hard as a flash threat. And a bit of color fixing. He's quite light on the land count. There's a Planeswalker, a removal spell, and a mana creature. I could actually see the mana creature being a good pickup for his deck. He's going to be quite hungry for mana, needs the card draw, and 1-mana creatures are going to play especially well. Even if it is a bit slow to get started. And Jace, 3-mana Planeswalkers are inherently pretty powerful. You're just kind of in the market for something cheap to get on board early with that kind of effect. Oh, sorry, I thought that was the Phyrexian mana creature. It's actually a Cankerbloom, which he's less in the market for. It is an above-rate cheap creature, but not one that plays particularly well into a long game or on offense. And he does pick up the Jace there. So, as I said, blue does have quite a few tools for wasting your opponent's mana if they're playing more expensive cards. So, if Fergus gets matched up against someone playing 3 or more mana cards, he's got a lot of tools to throw them off balance, and with all the card draw, he can just keep denying their mana until they just kind of keel over. And the Mystic here is really nice. He's got a bunch of cycling and card draw to trigger it. It is quite potent for a 2-mana threat. Once you get a couple tokens off of it, there's not really a way for your opponent to undo the impact it's had on the game. I found it to be not necessarily a powerful card, but quite a stressful card to play against. And there's a sideboard Flourishing Strike versus Optin Muldrifter. Muldrifter is a really strong card. The question is whether he can afford the space for it. And Bubble Snare also quite a efficient removal spell. And he's going to stick with the Opt. Muldrifter also not really playing that well with counterspells, as it's an expensive sorcery speed threat. Relatedly, I think he'd love to find a way to discard the Hydra rather than casting it face up, as he can set up a situation where he has 6 mana, cast the Hydra for 4 mana with Embalm, and then can protect it with counterspells. Or even just rush it out quickly and hope to untap with it. So into a deck review here. He's got a decent number of creatures. They're just a little undersized depending how things shake out. And then if Fergus can keep his opponent from getting ahead in the early turns, he's got so many counterspells, he can pretty easily lock them out of the game. We'll see how many counterspells do actually make it into his deck, and if there's the kind of threats in this cube that you can pair with counterspells to make something kind of unbeatable without removal. If there's something like that available to him, it'll be a big boon. And we see a River Hoopoe is kind of nice to pair with counterspells, as it gives you an instant speed mana sink. He's already picked up a few of those, but this one is more reliable over a longer game. And a 2-mana 1/3 just does alright at maintaining parity on the board early. Otherwise, Merfolk Skydiver is a pretty efficient card, and Serum Visions is probably the most powerful of them in the abstract. Just a very strong card, but he is pretty heavy on cantrips, so a card that will definitely make his deck, but we'll see if he's going to be wishing he had the Hoopoe later on. But not actually too short on 1 and 2 mana creatures, and definitely not short on things to do at instant speed. We see Sai, another more synergistic card. And a piece of mana fixing, that's pretty tempting here. And we see the importance of synergies in this cube. Cards like Sai, Ginger Brute, and Surfarin can be really nice pickups if you're in the right deck for them, and you kind of have to know what's possible and commit to the archetype. And Is It Boilerworks, also a card I rate very highly, but the Prismatic Vista is something his deck is lacking so far. So he goes for it here. Still quite a lot of red and white floating around in these packs as well. The young Pyromancer back there is actually the kind of creature that can run away with the game if he pairs it with counterspells. That's one where an unchecked Pyromancer, if you can protect it from removal, can take over the game by itself. And Seal of Removal is a nice one. That's another way he can convert card advantage into on-board advantage, and otherwise these Horizon Cycling lands, sacrifice lands, are, of the 2-color lands, they're the ones I'm most likely to run when I only need one of the 2 colors. Fergus does have use for both of the colors, but I have had plenty of times playing a Waterlogged Grove in a blue-red deck. And with his deck being mostly pretty low to the ground, he's got a use for the sack land. These sack lands they suffer a bit in decks with more expensive spells, as even when you're flooding out, you can't afford to sacrifice a land. And the real utility they give you is you can basically have a sacrifice land in lieu of 4, 5, and 6 mana spells. So they're a good excuse to cut the top end cards, play only cheap cards, and have more reliable opening hands. And we see a sideboard card, some synergy cards, and Curious Obsession is really nice. This is better than Curiosity almost always. The +1/+1 is a very meaningful buff because you're often putting it on a small creature and dragging the game out to connect multiple times. So he's got a decent number of small flyers. He hasn't shown a reason to cut the Curiosity, so yeah, better Curiosity is a really nice pickup here. And that makes a second targeted spell for his Hero of Lena Tower. We'll see if that's enough to make it into his deck. The hero, as heroic triggers go, it is one of the heroic triggers that doesn't scale so well with multiple triggers. So you're pretty happy just triggering the Hero of Lena once or twice after casting it. We see another 1/1 flyer for 1, Anasemic Growth Chamber. So these bounce lands are a really potent form of card advantage. It's essentially a 1-mana divination, but the catch of it is it can be quite awkward. You can't use it turn 1, and it's generating you extra mana to try and cast 4, 5, and 6 mana spells. Or at least have double spell turns. And nothing remarkable in this pack. Witching Well is a very easy card to talk yourself into playing. The Scry 2 helps you hit your 4 land drops, and paying 4 mana to draw 2 doesn't sound too bad, but as a question of efficiency, it's a very inefficient card, and there are a lot of games where you simply can't spare being down a card like that or having to pay 4 mana. And we see Weatherlight, not going to be at its best. He's quite a creature light deck, and doesn't have the historic permanence to find off of it. The green creature does alright, but I think he's got to have some mind towards whether he needs to be playing green. He could be doing an absolute last minute swap into black because that black removal spell is really powerful and really shores up a weakness of his deck. And Reclamation Sage, another classic sideboard card. Man, Witch's Vengeance is a great black spell, but he is pretty happy with the Bubble Snare as well. And both of the Simic Gold cards came around. He's a bit light on the Proliferate synergies, so I think River Hoopoe is a better fit here. But the Merfolk Skydiver is a bit of a better creature just on the surface. If he's not too concerned about activating it. So his best cards are almost all cheap creatures with 1 power. He's going to need to get ahead on the board in some way and then lock his opponent out with counterspells, which is pretty viable. It's just a question of he will struggle with decks that play 1 mana creature into 2 mana creature, but not every deck does that. And you can have some belief in your strategy that things will go the way you want them to. No respect for the bounce lands. And another land that's not making it into his deck. So we're up into match 1 against Sammy. Turn 1, starting off with a cantrip. It's a very nice backup turn 1 play, but for Fergus's deck especially, he wants to be setting up quickly and getting something going so that he can just start passing with counterspells up. And the Mystic is exactly the kind of thing he wants to start off with. It's a great find there. The Serum Visions was setting up some lands, so Fergus manages to hit his first 3 land drops. And no turn 1 or 2 play out of Sammy is very good news for Fergus. If she doesn't have something impressive here, he can just lock her out of the game entirely. And while Phyrexian Missionary is quite impressive, there's quite a lot Fergus can do with the Mystic to make it irrelevant. So starting off with a Curiosity here, this will start triggering the Mystic and getting his board going. Oh, and a Curious Obsession. The eggs are in the basket. It's hard to feel too risky doing this kind of thing, as you already get your card back, and Fergus is not too upset just cycling off the Curiosity. Especially now that he's got a 1/1 flyer token to carry on the torch if the Mystic dies. And now, this is where Sammy really needs a removal spell. If she can take out the Mystic here, she's back in control of the game. And with the density of counterspells in Fergus's deck, this might be her only chance to do it. And just a passing for this turn. Looks like she could be missing a second color here. So starts with a flyer, and now if Fergus can protect the Mystic, the game's all over from here. Oh, and there's a depose. The removal spell has been found. Does Fergus have an answer? So he can cycle off the Consider to make a 1-1 at least. But lets it go. And he's got another 1-1 flyer here. And just passing the turn. So he's fallen behind in the race. It's very risky to triple block the Missionary here. But he can't afford to race it, and if Sammy can stop the Mystic, that's Fergus's best tool for keeping up in the game. Not to mention this window of opportunity to resolve a 3 or 4 mana spell. Oh, and he goes for the triple block. Does she have a removal spell? Oh, and no tricks. That is devastating. And Fergus still humming along on 3 lands. So he can play Fubblethip and try to hit a 3rd land drop to be able to cast that and another 2 mana spell in the same turn. Which he manages to line up. Hurts a bit for efficiency to lose out on a Mystic trigger, but the extra mana can make a difference. And in for 1 again. But Sammy taps it, cycling off her split card. And the Mystic is down. And we see this is the kind of slow start that a deck full of counterspells can really punish. Oh, and here's a Wrath. Gonna reset the game. Fergus has got a better shot of rebuilding here. But with Sammy having mana troubles, I think she's pretty happy just to draw the game out a bit, try and find a blue source, and unlock the card stuck in her hand. Well, I'll see if what the follow-up is going to look like from this Wrath. And still no blue mana out of Sammy, so just passing for the turn and giving Fergus an opportunity to resolve his instance. And here we have an uncontested Planeswalker. This is a huge play on an empty board with a counterspell backup. This is the ideal situation that Fergus's deck has been built to exploit. Oh, and a swamp into a Mer Retriever. And no need to counter that one. And Jace continuing to run away. Fergus would like to set up a free block on this Mer Retriever, but with the state of the game, even trading the Pestamite for it is not bad. With no relevant artifacts in Sammy's graveyard. And a 4-mana spell here. Not so good against counterspells. We'll see which one Fergus wants to deploy first. And very wise. And just continuing to convert all of his extra cards into a big mana advantage. And running out a bit of instant speed card draw, but all Fergus needs is a way to close out the game. Ultimating Jace may not be viable based on how small his library is looking. And the density of card draw and 1-power creatures in Felix's deck. He has an Elspeth Smite to take out the attacking Pestamite. Which is answered by a Syncopate for 2. Fergus can't really afford to let one of his powerful threats go. And no Jace activation this turn. Traxxas returns. Fergus is going to need an answer to this because his Bubble Snare does not stop it from untapping. Oh, and the Traxxas resolves. Without a counterspell for it, it's going to be tough for Fergus to deal with the Traxxas. And cycles off the Grove, looking for answers. Pilgrim's Eye is just another cantrip. So he can use the Bubble Snare as a one-time tapping of the Traxxas and just hope that Sammy doesn't have enough ways to untap it, which is certainly plausible. It's not the most artifact dense cube. And especially this late in the game, it might be tough for her to line up 3 artifacts. But that was the last chance to use the bubble snare. As depending whether Sammy is playing around the bubble snare, she can only untap Traxos on her own turn. Oh, but Fergus has got a big creature of his own. On-It Hydra is all he needs to close out the game, and it looks like it's going to come down a lot to whether Sammy can untap this Traxos. If she has 2 artifact spells here, she can have it as an attacker and a blocker. There's one. And with life to spare, she can, even without another historic spell, she can send it in here and try to knock Fergus down to 3, and then from there, a Scrap Trawler can finish off the job. It can be a little unintuitive sometimes playing with these creatures that untap at strange times. As the untaps are a finite resource, but you also can't make use of more than 2 untaps in a turn. So depending how cautious Fergus wants to be, he can send in just the On-It Hydra and Trample strongly disincentivizes Sammy from blocking it. And with a Bubble Snare in hand, he can deal with a creature that she plans to block with. But he doesn't have an answer to the Traxos. I think he's got to accept that if Sammy can cast another historic permanent, she's going to win. And we're getting a ruling on the interaction of Mer Retriever and Scrap Trawler. So if they die at the same time, I believe they both can be returned to your hand. So Fergus might not be able to send in the On-It Hydra after all, as it would give Sammy 2 more historic triggers. And he'd be facing down lethal from the Traxos. So he might have to just play it slow here, leave back the Hydra, and try to chip in with 3 damage at a time in the air. Oh, but he's going for the Bubble Snare. So this breaks up the possibility of recursion. And he can't really beat the Traxos. He could block it with the Hydra to buy another turn. But the more viable path to victory may just be accepting that Traxos is lethal. But he's playing it safe here. Oh, and no plays this turn. He's faded another draw step. And he's kind of committed to attacking 5 times with the Pestamite, but he may not have enough cards in library to do that. And there's a very late Fairy Conclave. If Sammy gets another turn, then she untaps with blue, but Fergus has got lethal set up right now. He can get a minimum 5 damage with the Hydra, 3 in the air. He's got a counterspell backup, sends them in, and Sammy shows him all of her blue cards. Game 1 goes to Fergus. A much more reliable mana base, and some nice counterspells against those more expensive threats. And we're off to Game 2 with Sammy on the play. Oh, a turn 1 Vault Scourge. I like Fergus's density of 1-mana creatures. He's really getting ahead early and then securing that lead. Looks like he's got a Curiosity effect in hand as well, which would put Sammy on a seriously small window to remove the Vault Scourge. I think that's 2 Curiosity effects. And it's hard to feel like you're being punished for going all in like this, because even if the Vault Scourge gets removed, he's already replaced the 2 Curiosities he's used. So it just gets in for 1. Gains 1 life off lifelink. And passes the turn for now, so not committing the second Curiosity just yet. Oh, and Sammy's got a flying 1/1. This is a good blocker against the Vault Scourge, but if Fergus chucks the second Curiosity onto it, he can go over the top. And Chrome Courier drawing Traxos, which Sammy is built around, but it's often not the best against a blue deck to be relying on a 4-mana card. So he loads up the Curious Obsession now. Worth the chump block. So he's got a Censor. If Sammy's got a 2-mana answer to the Vault Scourge, she's in the clear here. Or 3 mana if she's got an untapped land. That Dimir Aqueduct is tapping for 2 mana. And we'll see if he's got something to protect it more severely now that he's got access to more mana. Oh, Sammy's going for the 4-mana mode. Deploy. which is going to get censored. Takes two. Fergus gets 2 cards. At this point, it looks like he's going to run away with the game again. Censor, understandably not at the top of Sammy's radar. I think that's the only taxing counterspell in Fergus's deck. Oh, and Man of War, excellent answer here. And also very valuable to be acting on Fergus's turn, forcing him to tap lower. If he had a 3-mana counterspell, he didn't have access to it that turn. Not sure what he's got access to for 2 mana. Oh, looks like he's got a Syncopate, which would have been unable to counter the Mana War. Syncopate, very costly to try and hold up in the mid-game. And not replaying the Vault Scourge, so really indicating he's got a 3-mana counterspell here. But Sammy's no longer under the gun with these curiosities, so she can afford to play a bit slower. Maybe play around the counterspells a bit before dropping the Traxos, if she has the means to do so. But Traxos is a pretty inflexible card. She may have to just go for the Traxos first and hope for the best. So starting with Kasmina, and that's going to get syncopated. And even with Fergus having a creature, he would have been hard-pressed to hit the Kasmina that turn, so the 2 2/2s and 2 loots out of it would have lined up. So starting the turn with a consider to put a counter on the Thopter Mechanic for drawing a second card. Looks like he's got some flyers to deploy. And because Sammy sent in the Mana War, she hasn't got a block. She's behind on the race. And he's got the options of Jace and Quick Study. Looks like it's going to be a Quick Study for this turn, and hoping that Sammy doesn't play any more threats, so Fergus can have a protected Jace on a following turn. And Fergus has really been representing a lot of counterspells in his deck, so could be credibly bluffing something there, but Sammy can't afford to play around much. And yeah, just tapping out for a Mo Retriever. She doesn't mind that getting countered. So Fergus draws 3 off the Quick Study, which triggers the Thopter Mechanic. He's got to pick a card to discard. And he's giving up on the Jace plan. Very hard to defend it against a Traxos, unless he's got a bounce spell here. And he can take 2 hits on the chin from the Traxos. Oh, that is really nice. Tapping the Traxos is unusually effective. Fergus won't be able to stop Sammy untapping it with the artifacts that she draws, but if he can keep her from finding ways to get additional cards in hand, he can limit the number of untaps Traxos has, and hope that she can't cast 3 more artifacts before he can end the game, essentially. Generally, not advised to manage Traxos this way, as Sammy's built her deck to have a pretty high number of artifacts, and you're really at the mercy of her only having to draw 3 artifacts. If not 2, depending if she can get a shot in with the Man of War or something else twice. And Mer Retriever currently unable to retrieve something. And Sammy casts and eliminate the competition. So she sacrifices 2 creatures to destroy 2 of Fergus's creatures. The sacrifice is a cost, so if he's got a counter here, it'll be devastating. This is a risky move. Ah, there's a Chrome Courier in the graveyard. That's a nice retrieval. And he does have the counter spell. That is a huge counter. Now, with Sammy having the Chrome Courier, there is a real time limit on the game. Oh, and Wishing Well, that's another nice hit. It's quite valuable against blue, having cards like this that are only 1 mana to cast, and then once it resolves, you can spend more mana on it. And she's confident enough, she's not sending in the Traxos. So it's back on blocking duty this turn. Next turn, she's got the Chrome Courier, and with Chrome Courier and Wishing Well, it's very likely she can chain into the 3rd artifact. Fergus, starting off with a quick study. Triggers the mechanic. He doesn't urgently need to answer the Traxos for his own life total, but now that Sammy can chain together artifacts, it's functionally got Vigilance, so it's going to be playing offense and defense, which makes it much harder to race with the Thopter mechanic. And while he can set up a trade, he's pretty light on threats in deck. This Thopter mechanic is one of the few ways he has to close out the game. So he's going for a Bubble Snare here. 4 mana to tap a creature, worth it in this situation. And so he goes all the way to 2. She's got to have some way to... So she's got a Chrome Courier that'll likely gain her 2 life and be at least a chump block on the Thopter mechanic. So that's big here. Gets the untap trigger. Oh, and it's just 2 lands. No 2 life. Her life total is low enough against these flyers that just gaining 1 or 2 life there would have been big. And it looks like she's got another artifact in hand, so she can send in with the Traxos this turn, untap it as a blocker. On the surface of things, she's going to 1. And here's a Scrap Trawler. Untaps the Traxos. Can get back the Murretriever for another Traxos trigger next turn. So she can chump block the Thopter Mechanic here, trade with the Volt Scourge, and block with the Traxos. So Fergus can guarantee 1 damage this turn. If he's got any way to push more damage, he can go for lethal, but if he doesn't, it's very risky. So it sends it all in. Sammy can, on the surface, block the mechanic with the Traxos and not lose the Traxos. If Fergus has a way to draw an extra card, she'll be losing the Traxos. And she doesn't really mind chumping with the Scrap Trawler, although the Chrome Courier will be getting back the Murretriever regardless. Of course, the Grove. And trading with the Traxos there is huge. Sammy would have been presenting a lot of damage there. Now, the Scrap Trawler triggers means that she can get the Chrome Courier back to hand and the Murretriever. She's getting a lot of value with the Scrap Trawler. And this might have been a misread of the Scrap Trawler. I think Sammy's put the creatures straight into play rather than back to her hand. And Fergus has just got a Pilgrim's Eye, but 3 flyers means that without the life gain off the Chrome Courier, she doesn't have a way to survive. It's looking like she's dead on board unless she can draw something good off of the Witching Well. But if she can stabilize a bit, she has a good shot. The Scrap Trawler is going to keep recycling cards. Fergus is going to run out of cards in library. He doesn't have too much power on board. If she can just gain a bit of life or find a more powerful defense. And there's Sai. But Sai needs artifacts in hand to trigger. The ones in play are no good. Oh, she's digging for something here. Sacrifices 2 artifacts for a card. And Muratriva returns the Chrome Courier. So she's going with the Chrome Courier here. Makes a 1/1 flyer. Does not gain any life. She can deal with 3 of the 4 flyers. But that's not enough to stay alive. Very close to stabilizing here. But it looks like she just is not going to be able to do it. These misses off of Chrome Courier have been game-changing. And Fergus takes the match. Sammy's deck not fully cooperating. And we're off to match 2 against Andre. Showing off the winning playmat from last weekend's tournament. And both players with a good setup start. Fergus looking like he's pretty happy with both the cards on top. So some good draws coming there. And here's a Carrion Feeder to start off. Oh, and a bounce land, very powerful. And this is the kind of 1-mana threat that Fergus just cannot interact with. If Andre piles too much into it, he can lock it down or find some other way to get it off the board, but otherwise he's just going to be taking 6 or 7 damage, even with it as a 1/1. And we've got a Scornblade Berserker here. Brings it up to a 2/2, 1 mana floating, so sacrifices the Scornblade's Berserker to its own ability straight away. And another 1-mana play. It's a Viscera Seer. These are the kind of cheap threats that Fergus is naturally going to struggle with. And he lands a Syncopate on the Viscera Seer. That does matter quite a bit. But he can only take so many chip shots from this Carrion Feeder until he starts having to make suboptimal plays to get it off the board. Judith is really nice, and he's glad he's got the Exclude here. Exclude is a huge win for Fergus in that exchange. Judith is very hard for him to beat with all of his small creatures. And anytime you resolve and exclude, you're usually quite far ahead. So leading off with a Thopter Mechanic into a Consider. Going to get a +1 counter on it, and if he can find a land, he can make another 1-mana play. The mechanic quite good at blocking the carrion feeder. And agonizing over that pick there. So he's got a hedge maze and another surveil. This time, not interested in Fergus, just wants to hit his land drops and deploy his quick study. Fergus is giving Andre a window here to resolve a 4 or 5 mana spell. And then once he's out of that, he can start holding up counters for whatever's coming next. And here's a Sling Gang Lieutenant. This gives him the fodder to make an attack with the carrion feeder if he wants. Oh, and Judith, this is very synergistic. So he can sacrifice 2 creatures to the carrion feeder, just kill the Thopter mechanic, send in with the 4/4. But he can also just send in the carrion feeder as is. Fergus doesn't really have a good block. So here we've got an attack for 3 thanks to Judith's passive. If Fergus blocks, he's going to be trading his Thopter mechanic for one of the goblins, which is not where he wants to be. It's going to be really hard for him to beat Judith. So it just takes the 3 for now. With the combination of Judith and Sling Gang Lieutenant, Andre's got 8 damage on board already. So Fergus is at a virtual 3 life. Oh, my mistake. Judith does not trigger off of tokens dying. So the situation is not quite as grim as I painted it. So Andre going for a block with the 2/1. If Fergus draws a card at instant speed, he can save the Thopter mechanic. But then if any of Andre's non-token creatures die, he can finish it off. And this is a good spot for Radical ID. So Andre could commit to trading the Lieutenant for the remainder of the Thopter mechanic, but he's also got the option of just sacrificing the Goblin for some life drain and accepting it as a chump block. Because on board, he very likely has lethal. So yeah, he's got 13 damage on board. 14 if he had sacrificed the Goblin for life. But it looks like he's happy to set up to clean up the Thopter mechanic. Not taking a risk just yet. Carrion Feeder eats the Lieutenant. Finishes off the mechanic. Fergus gets a 1/1. And all of these 0 mana, instant speed, triggered abilities, activated abilities. It's just creating a real headache once all of these things are in play. Andre does have lethal on board. Except for the Thopter token. But if he plays out any non-token creature, he's got lethal on board. This is also a way to do it. And as I said earlier, nice against blue decks to have a 1-mana spell that they want to counter, because you don't have to commit mana into the activation cost until it's resolved. But he sends them in, so he can go for lethal if he takes out the Thopter before damage, but this is also very good for him. Oh, sorry, you wouldn't be able to go for lethal there. But he's looking like he's in a very commanding position here. So Fergus fires off a quick study, but he doesn't have many tools for catching up from behind. He's drawn another counterspell. He's facing down a lot of damage and a lot of interlocking synergy pieces that are already in play. And his small creatures are so locked out by Judith. He needed to have at minimum an Honored Hydra here. And Andre maybe just snapping off the capsule here to close out the game. If he kills one of the blockers, then Fergus is taking 4. So he's not dead yet. But pretty safe to snipe one of them here. He hasn't seen any particularly big creatures out of Fergus yet. And Andre really only needs to have some more creatures to play to set up for lethal this turn. And likely leading with some of his weaker creatures to work through the counterspells. There's a remand. Good answer here. And this time a 2-mana creature. If Fergus lets this resolve, he's dead. But now that he's tapped his Pain Land, he's dead regardless, so he chump blocks the Carrion Eater, takes 4 damage, Judith triggers off of the Carrion Feeder sacrificing itself, and that's lethal. Game 1 goes to Andre. A lot of damage and work done off the back of that. Carrion Feeder came down way too early for Fergus's interaction. And here we see a Viscera Seer. Not going to be as big as the Carrion Feeder, but still an important engine card. But Fergus has got a quick Thopter mechanic. This is one of his more resilient threats against cards like Judith. Oh, and a lava coil. Exiles it, so Fergus does not get a Thopter out of the deal. And it's not looking great. He's got a Pestamite, or he can do some cantripping, neither of which interacts well with a Visceraseer, but I think he'll do alright just tapping Andre's land with the Pestamite, getting a 2-1 flyer down. That does put him ahead in the race for now. He can work out where things are going from there. So here's the Pestamite. A bit ambiguous whether it's better to tap down the Pain Land or the Swamp. And I think Andre's seeing if he's got a response. If he's got an instant speed red spell, taking out Pestamite is a pretty safe use of this mana that he'll be losing regardless, as he's probably going to have to kill the Pestamite at some point. So, happy to trade the Visceraseer. And no further plays from Andre. Oh, and a remand off the top. That's really nice. Fergus has got a route to be in charge this game. He's picked up another counterspell. So he can use Remand and Neutralize to just ensure that essentially the battlefield does not change. And he can just keep hitting with Pestamite until he's far ahead in the life totals. And there's an Ulcerate. Costs Andre some life, but well worth it for the mana efficiency here. It's plays very well against the Remand. And now Fergus less incentivized to sit back forever, but with Neutralize and Remand in hand, he should definitely not be giving Andre an opportunity to resolve a 3-mana spell. So Andre's still going with the cheap spells. Scornblade Berserker performs pretty well as just essentially a cantripping aura. And by only playing cheap spells, he's stranding the Remand in Fergus's hand. It's tough to just fire it off, as eventually Andre's going to run out of cheap spells, and then it's going to get really good. But he can use the Bubble Snare here, blunt the offense, and then sit back on the Remand. And Fergus with a Curiosity Aura in hand, if he can draw one of his 1-mana flyers, he'll be in good shape. And another card that is good against Remand. He can take a bit of a gamble and let this one resolve, as Andre really needs a second piece for Goblin Engineer to get to work. But it's putting a big risk on the table. So he's going to cash in the Remand now. Let Andre resolve a 2-mana spell. And here's the Engineer. So it's going to be tough for Fergus to have Neutralize on the coming turn. Looks like he's got an untapped land and a 1-mana creature. Or no creature, though. And Goblin Engineer pairs very well with Messiah. So Fergus is going to tap out for a Bubble Snare on it now. Paying extra for the kicker and going shields down on the Neutralize. This is Andre's opportunity to resolve a Judith or something else similarly devastating. And here it is. Things are going to get a little uphill from here. So Andre can push in for 3 damage right now. He's likely going to be able to close the game out in 2 or 3 turns, and with Fergus having quite a creature-light draw, he's got to hope to top deck something that plays well against Judith. And Andre just picks up his cycling land. Can cash that in a bit later. Oh, and it's just a tap land for Fergus. He's got an aura, a fight spell, and a counter spell. All things that really struggle to play from behind like this. Those removal spells on Fergus's creatures have put him way behind in the game. This is a typical weakness of blue-based aggro decks is they have a small number of synergistic creatures and they struggle if those creatures are removed. And then on the other side of the coin, black-red decks tend to be very heavy on removal spells. And especially these sacrifice decks are often about some kind of triggered or activated ability that often translates into more creature removal. Oh, and here's a Blood Artist. So Andre hits for 5. Each creature he sacrifices can cash in for 2 damage. So it's almost lethal. I think he's off by 1. But it's not a bad spot to be in. So he can sacrifice the Engineer to deal 2 to Fergus. If he sacrifices the Blood Artist, that'll deal another 2. And then the Seer is the 5th point, and that at that point Fergus is on 1. So, not lethal for now, but setting up for lethal very soon. And Fergus has got Fubblethorpe here, which is one of his better top decks. And suiting it up now, if Andre wants to snipe it, he'll have to do it with the aura on the stack. And Fergus may be setting up for a nice little trick here. If Andre goes to shoot the Fubblethorpe, Fergus has got Tail Swipe that'll give it +1/+1, as long as he casts it during his own main phase. So, while we think of that mode of Tail Swipe as being a sorcery, here it can actually be used as a bit of a combat trick. Oh, but Curious Obsession is not good on a summoning sick creature. If Fergus doesn't attack, the aura sacrifices itself. Not as good a situation, but regardless, back against the wall. Andre takes down match 2 with I would say, quite a favorable matchup, and we'll be jumping ahead to the finals in a moment. So I've got Andre still on the right, and I believe Reginald on the left. And Andre on the draw with another 1-mana creature. He's got quite a lot of 1-drops, and especially in other formats, it can sometimes be a liability to have these cheap creatures later on when they get stonewalled by larger creatures, but with all of Andre's sacrifice and death trigger synergy, he can convert them into a resource as the game drags out. And Reginald's got an Adanto Vanguard, a very nice attacker. This may be one of its worst matchups, as Andre's pretty happy to trade a 1-1 for 4 life in this style of deck. And he's got another 3-1. So the way this game's shaping up, a lot of it is going to come down to Andre's ability to produce 1 damage in the form of disposable 1-1s or damage pings off of Judith, because they match up quite well against these 3-1s. Carrion Feeder likely to not get involved in combat with one of these. Reggie would much rather just take the 1. But he's sending them in, so forced to trade some valuable resources for this squirrel. Andre makes the call as to whether he cares more about life or cards in hand. And early in the game, cards tend to be more valuable, so cashing in for one of those. And it looks like it's a tough choice of what to discard. He's got a 4 and 5 mana creature, and I think he's got a land to play, so it'll be tough to pass up those mid-game threats. So, just discarding another 2-drop. So the squirrel dies, Andre takes 3. And sending a fairly clear signal that he's got something to do if he's discarded the 2-drop. Andre cashes in the sphere. Oh, and here's a Shalai. A splash white creature. So this 3-4 gives Andre and his other creatures hexproof. Not actually too relevant against a green-white deck. More importantly, it's a big flyer. And the 4 toughness is going to wall out a lot of Reggie's early attackers. Oh, the stag takes it out. Doesn't get a 2-for-1. But he's pretty happy to just open up attacks, send in for 10. That's a ton of damage. And Andre hasn't managed to get on the board. Once he'd worked those 3-1s through Andre's 1-1 blockers, they do convert into a very real amount of damage. The inability to block mattering on the Carrion Feeder, and Yeva just being too big for a lot of Andre's removal. The red and even a lot of the black-based removal is toughness-based and doesn't go above 3. And here's a Goblin Engineer to start setting up. And Andre's grabbing a Executioner's Capsule. This is a nice one to recur with Goblin Engineer, as just being able to set up a repeatable removal source gives him more time, which means more Engineer activations. Now, Reginald does have 2 indestructible creatures, so the Executioner's Capsule is not a complete lock. Oh, and here's Witch's Vengeance. Doesn't manage to tag 2 creatures, but it does deal with the indestructible one. Oh, and that's 7 damage. Takes the game. Those 2 mana 3/1s put up some really nice early aggression to prevent him getting locked out by the Engineer. And leading off with the Scornblade Berserker. Quite unusual to see this putting the counter on itself, as usually you want to cycle off the body, but as a turn 1 play, perfectly acceptable, happy to make do against such a fast deck. And here's the Figure of Destiny. Oh, and this is a quick Goblin Engineer. Going for the Messiah this time. So against the army of small creatures, Messiah is a really nice blocker, and it's part of a loop with Goblin Engineer. You can turn one Sire into 2 artifacts, and then use one of those artifacts to get back the Sire. So you can eventually use Goblin Engineer with Messiah to create extra cards, which is important when Engineer can turn those cards into cards like Executioner's Capsule. So we saw just a level up of the Figure of Destiny to a 2/2 in order to trade with the Goblin Engineer. And here's Judith, another card that's very good against all these small creatures. Gets in for 2. So now we're more likely to see Andre snapping off the Berserker just to get a damage in if there's a particularly valuable 1 toughness creature. But we've got something much larger for the standards of this cube, is a 3/3. Now Andre can still trade the Berserker with it. So if he wants to push attacks or block, he can still engage in combat like that. Oh, and here's Skinrender. Always a beating. Andre gets in for 4, takes out the elephant, and even another elephant is going to struggle to keep up here. Andre's up to 8 power on board, and Judith can often represent a lot of surprise extra damage. And trying to manage this through blocking is going to be quite risky. There's a good chance that Andre's got another removal spell lined up. And often you can hedge against removal by playing only small creatures, but having multiple small creatures, there's a lot that Judith can do to break that up. Double blocking is very risky. It's going to be tough to navigate this. And Vanguard, not great on defense. Putting the aura on the Skinrender is one of the better ways to deal with it, as it doesn't trigger Judith. So Andre pushes in for 4 damage this turn. No point in blocking with the Vanguard unless he's willing to just cash it in for 2 life. And Nestor Chambler does a good job of blocking the Vanguard if Reginald manages to get back on the offense. Tapper's also a good way of managing threats out of these recursive black decks. But Lawrune Enforcer can't actually tap the Scornblade Berserker. Tapping Judith is fine too. And Skyfisher bounces the land, just setting it up as a chunky blocker. And passes with the option to spin up the Blinkmoth Nexus, but that's a very risky and unrewarding play to make. And looks like Andre's got an instant to consider. But just takes to the next turn. So he can essentially trade the Berserker with the Skyfisher. If he sends it in, they can block each other, bounces off, and then he can sacrifice it to draw a card and get the trigger. But it's a lot of resources just to deal with one creature. So sticking with the Nested Shambler for now. And we'll see if he's willing to pay 4 life to protect the Vanguard. Looks like he is. And now Andre gets a 1 damage trigger, but no point in targeting the Vanguard as it's already indestructible. Oh, but he's responding to the indestructible. So Vanguard is not indestructible yet, and if Reggie wants to save it, it's going to cost him another 4 life. And if he goes down to 2, he's very likely dead to Judith just going face. So accepts the Vanguard's death. The Nested Shambler does not die as it did not make it into combat. And Andre draws a card off the Berserker being sacrificed. And this Chromatic Sphere, I think primarily for Goblin Engineer purposes. Just another filler artifact that can be easily cycled off for 1 mana, and Goblin Engineer can convert into an extra copy of Executioner's Capsule, or a way to get the Messiah train going. And a relevant piece of fixing in a 3-color deck. And just passing the turn again, looks like this is a pretty big sign of a Yiva being flashed in. Reggie is totally on defense, not sending in the Skyfisher. And here's the return of Witch's Vengeance. Once again, no overlapping creature types. So you can't get a 2-for-1 here. Oh, they're both soldiers. Witch's Vengeance has performed really well in this cube. It's just a pretty good deal to kill something for 3 mana, and the rate at which you get 2 or even 3 of your opponent's creatures is quite high. So he sends in the Judith. Yeva gets flashed in. And it's looking like he's getting a free block on the Judith. Oh, but Andre's got an ulcerate. Yeva gets shrunk down to a 1-1, turns this into a chump block, and importantly, Judith gets to stick around. With Judith's passive ability just being a real nuisance to play against. So he can flashback Call of the Herd. That brings him a 3-3 blocker, but that still trades with the Nested Shambler. Oh, and I think the flashback has been forgotten. Very easy to miss when games go on, and these graveyards just get cluttered up with cards. So Andre's got a good attack here. He's going to get the Blinkmoth Nexus involved. And Blinkmoth Nexus can buff itself, which is what he's going for here. So can turn any Blinkmoth, give any Blinkmoth +2, +1/+1, which lets it trade with Judith. Takes 2 damage off the Judith triggers. 2 squirrels thanks to Judith boosting Nested Shambler's power to 2. Oh, and here's a Shalai. Facing down a lot of damage. But he's drawn a Militia Bugler, which is a really nice 3-drop in any stage of the game. And now that Judith is off the table, things are a little less hectic. It's got 2 creatures to choose from. And the adventure on this is going to buy him an extra turn, not getting attacked by Shalai. He can't target the squirrel tokens. But they don't have an amazing attack this turn anyway. And Andre still hasn't cashed in the Sphere. If he can find 2 more lands and at least one of them produces green, he can actually activate Shalai's ability. But that's very far away. Pretty unlikely he's playing a 4th color in his mana base. Oh, and here's Felden. Felden is a bit of a value monster. There's a lot of combos with it. As a general rule of thumb, anytime you activate Felden, you're going to be able to get some kind of value train going. Especially if Andre can get this Skin Render into the graveyard, then that'll be recursive removal spells, but it's not going to get to that point. Andre evens it up, 1 apiece, and we're on to the final game of the night. Ooh, Voice of Resurgence. No 1-drops from either player this game. Voice is a card that's going to play really well here. Good against removal. Sizes up into a relevant threat. But Reggie's got to be a little concerned with killing Andre before he can set up some kind of engine involving Goblin Engineer or some other kind of synergy piece like Judith. And looks like he's got some options here. He's got multiple instant speed plays, or he can tap out for something. And this is nice. Beefs up the voice. And Andre's got the Judith, but his creatures are a bit too small, and he's fallen a bit behind. So he can. There's not a great way to block here, so he's going to take the trade with the voice. Oh, and gets hit by a feat of resistance. Voice gains protection from black. And takes one off the Judith trigger. A 4/4 is enormous. And Andre would really like to set up some kind of play where he can take out all of Reggie's creatures at the same time, shrink the voice token, and be able to deal with it at a low cost. And here is the Goblin Engineer, so the clock's on. Unlikely he's got a way to interact with what Andre's setting up here. Aside from just trying to attack and shorten the length of the game. So if Andre can block and prolong the game, a bunch of Goblin Engineer activations with Executioner's Capsule and Mercire will win the game for him. He just needs the time, but once the engine is up and running, the repeatable removal will give him plenty of time. And doesn't go for a white main line here. So, good attacks. Happy to trade for either of Andre's creatures. He might have to just trade off the Judith here. Oh, and he's going to trade off the Engineer. So this is a more defensive line. And if he can... This is putting him on the path to clearing out all of Reginald's creatures. He can safely activate the capsule on his turn, as it won't trigger the voice's first ability. Cycles Ash Barrens to fix his mana, probably getting a Plains here. He's still got 1 mana floating from the bounce land. Oh, and a Lava Coil. Best possible answer for the voice at this point. So voice gets exiled, does not make a token, and Adanto Vanguard is all he's got left. But he gets to save it with the white main line. This is pretty nice. But pulls a bunch of power off the board, and importantly, Andre can now use his Executioner's Capsule to buy more time. So bounce resolves. And Andre just passes the turn with 2 mana up. So he goes for a block. Reggie pays 4 life to give it indestructible. And Andre's got an answer with the fungal infection. Gets around indestructible. Andre's removal has really been blanking Reginald's card abilities. Voice of Resurgence doesn't trigger. Adanto Vanguard doesn't work. And once these resilient creatures are just acting as normal creatures, they're actually pretty overpriced. Oh, and tough on the land tapping. Gets a 1 mana creature that he might not be able to play this turn. Oh, he's got a land rolled up. And runs out the Enforcer before the Voice. Enforcer does need to tap to get going, so it's more urgent to get that in play earlier than the Voice. And looks like Andre's got quite a few cards he could go for, but only one can be played this turn. And it's going to be a Witch's Vengeance. Are we seeing the Soldier Tribal backfire once again? Gets a clean 2-for-1, and happy to go on the offense. The Saproling is a 2-1, so it has a good block on the white main line, and Andre knows that the last card was a Voice of Resurgence. It's looking like Andre's in the driver's seat from here out. He's nullified a lot of Reggie's abilities, cleaned up a lot of his creatures. Just a string of hosing removal spells. And gets the trade with the Saproling. Reggie's got a protection spell in hand, saving for presumably the Executioner's Capsule. And we've got the return of Skinrender. Shelter's going to save the voice. Let's see if he can do anything with just the voice in play. He's got to rebuild in the face of these two very powerful creatures, and an Executioner's Capsule just waiting to go off. So this recruit does have an artifact destruction ability. Very difficult to set it up at this point in the game. And there's a Viserys here. Not going to make too much of a difference. It means Andre can at least cash in his creatures at will. And likely he'll be alright trading off the Skinrender for both of Reggie's creatures. So sends in the 4-3. Especially with the... If there's a remaining voice token on an empty board, it'll just be a 1-1 and very easy for Andre to finish off. And passes the turn, he's got Executioner's Capsule at the ready. He's got a bunch of extra 1 damage shots out of Judith ready. And Andre's going to take out the voice before Reggie can trigger training on Hopeful Initiate. So has to do that before the declare attackers. And Andre not firing off the Unearth yet. I think, while it would be nice to get back the Goblin Engineer, he does need another artifact to sacrifice for it. So there's a chance that he's going to find something better to do with it later. So this block goes for a trade on the Seer. Andre's pushing 6 damage. Judith is going to put that up to 7. And with Unearth in hand, that'll be lethal. So good thing he saved it for this situation. So these trade takes 6 off of combat damage. Judith triggers and deals 1 more. And if Andre wants to go for it, he can unearth the Viserys Seer, sacrifice the Skinrender and the Seer, and that'll deal the last 2 points. Really powerful network of interlocking tools here. It's just really hard to fight back against this kind of thing with creatures. You really need some way to snipe cards like Judith and break up the synergies. So no rush to go for it yet. The Legion Vanguard can't sacrifice itself, but sacrificing the Judith will deal the last point regardless. And being patient here, he can just send them all in. If anything happens, he can respond by sacrificing the creatures. Looks like Andre's going to take the trophy this week with a very synergistic deck. Put a real masterclass together. And I hope you all enjoyed seeing the regular cube in action, one of the most documented cubes ever made. And I'm looking forward to playing it again in the future. I'll see you all next time.